There is a distinction that the film industry draws, not always consciously, between two types of actors. The first type is the personality, the star whose presence in a film is itself the event, whose face and voice and manner are so thoroughly identified with a single way of being in the world that audiences arrive knowing what they are going to receive and are satisfied by the receiving of it. The second type is the craftsman, the actor whose face is not the point, whose personality is not the product, who submerges whatever he actually is into whatever the character requires and emerges, on the other side of the submersion, as something the audience could not have predicted and cannot easily categorize. The craftsman is rarer. He is also, in the long run, more interesting. Fredric March was the craftsman, and the long run has confirmed what those who worked with him always knew, that the career he built across 5 decades of stage and screen work is one of the most varied and most consistently excellent in the history of American performance. Ernest Frederick McIntyre Bickle was born on August 31st, 1897, in Racine, Wisconsin, the son of a hardware merchant who expected his son to follow him into business and who got, instead, an actor. The path from Racine to Broadway was not direct. It passed through a banking job and an economics degree from the University of Wisconsin and the First World War, in which March served as an artillery officer, and from which he returned with the specific knowledge of violence and waste and the fragility of ordinary life that would inform the best work he did in the decades that followed. He came to acting in his mid-20s through stock companies and regional theater, and he arrived at it not as a natural, not as someone who had always known this was the destination, but as someone who had found, through trial and elimination, the thing he was most completely capable of doing. Broadway recognized him in the late 1920s. Hollywood recognized him in 1929, when Paramount signed him and began the process of determining what to do with a stage-trained actor of unusual range in a medium that was just learning to use sound. The early films established that the face, strong, mobile, capable of rapid shifts between registers, was something the camera found useful. They did not yet establish what the face was capable of when the material matched the instrument. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1931 established it definitively. The transformation sequence, March moving from the humane, compassionate Jekyll into the deformed, violent, sexually predatory Hyde, was, by the technical standards of the era, a feat of makeup artistry. The makeup took hours to apply. It was genuinely painful to wear. The physical contortions that Hyde required were not simulated, but actually performed, with the commitment of a man who understood that the character's physical horror had to be earned by the actor's physical reality if the audience was going to believe it. But the makeup was the least of what he did. What he did with his face and his body and his voice in those sequences. The way he played the pleasure Hyde takes in his own monstrousness, the specific quality of freedom that the character experiences in the release from moral constraint. The sexuality and the violence braided together in a performance that the production code would eventually make impossible to duplicate, was acting of a genuinely frightening order. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor. He shared it in an unusual tie with Wallace Beery for The Champ, and the sharing was an injustice of the minor Hollywood variety. The performance was not a tie. It was simply better than anything else that year, by a margin that the Academy's voting mathematics happened not to reflect. He worked through the 1930s with the sustained quality of a man who takes each project seriously, regardless of its scale. Comedies and dramas and literary adaptations and prestige pictures, playing opposite the great actresses of the era with the generosity of an actor who is not threatened by a co-star's excellence, because his own excellence is not competitive in that way. He did not need to be the best thing on screen. He needed to be the true thing. And when everyone on screen is trying to be true, the results are extraordinary. The Best Years of Our Lives in 1946, directed by William Wyler, gave him his second Academy Award and gave American cinema one of its great documents of the post-war experience. He played Al Stevenson, a middle-aged banker, husband, father, returning from the Second World War to a domestic life that no longer fits the man who left for it, with a specificity and a restraint that made the performance feel less like acting and more like witnessing. The screenplay gave him dialogue. He gave the spaces between the dialogue the weight of everything the dialogue could not say. He understood what the war had done to the men who fought it, because he had been to a war himself, and the understanding was not research, it was memory. He fought against the Hollywood blacklist with the specific courage of a man who understood what was at stake and was not willing to pretend otherwise for the sake of his own comfort. He signed petitions. He lent his name and his prestige to the defense of colleagues who had been accused, with the casual cruelty of the period, of political sympathies that made them unemployable. The signing cost him, not as much as it cost others, because his stature provided some protection, but enough to demonstrate that the gesture was genuine rather than calculated. He was not a man who signed things without meaning them. The stage work ran parallel to the screen work throughout his career, and the two fed each other in the way that they do for actors of genuine range, the stage demanding a completeness and a sustained intensity that film does not require, the film demanding an economy and a precision that the stage does not enforce. He won 2 Tony Awards, for Years Ago in 1947 and for Long Day's Journey into Night in 1956, in which he played James Tyrone, the aging actor patriarch of Eugene O'Neill's autobiographical family tragedy, with a depth and a self-knowledge that the role demands and that only an actor who has spent 30 years examining the cost of the performing life can fully provide. He was married to actress Florence Eldridge from 1927 until his death, 48 years, a collaboration that extended beyond the domestic into the professional, as she appeared alongside him in several of his stage productions, including Long Day's Journey. She was, by accounts of those who knew them, his most essential audience, the person whose assessment he trusted above all others, whose presence in the rehearsal room or the dressing room after a performance constituted the evaluation that mattered most. He died on April 14, 1975, in Los Angeles, at the age of 77, of prostate cancer. He had been, in the final years of his life, largely absent from the public eye, not from the working life, but from the celebrity apparatus that the industry increasingly confused with the working life. He had never been comfortable with the performance of fame, had never built or maintained a persona the way that the industry preferred its stars to do, had always subordinated the personality to the work, and found the personality sufficient for his purposes when it was not being required to perform. 2 Academy Awards, 2 Tony Awards. A career of 50 years that moved between comedy and tragedy and literary drama and social realism and horror with the ease of a man who had never accepted that any of those were separate territories rather than different parts of the same country. A face that the camera found useful and that the actor made extraordinary. He was the actor's actor. The phrase sounds like a compliment paid by specialists to a specialist. It was, in his case, something larger. The recognition that the person who disappears most completely into the work is the person who, in the end, is most completely present in it. Fredric March disappeared into every character he ever played. What he left behind in the disappearing was everything.